Have you ever wondered, what did Christmas look like before the birth of Jesus Christ? What did people do? Did people celebrate Christmas? What were they celebrating? What did it look like? Where did Santa Claus come from? Why do we exchange gifts? Why do we have Christmas trees in our house? Why do we do all these things? Well, me too. And I am so fascinated in discovering and uncovering the origins of Christmas in our Western culture. How did this come to be? As I dove into this topic and uncovering the truth about Christmas and the history of Christmas, I also discovered questions that rose like, was Jesus God's only son? Did the word virgin actually mean what we know it to mean today? So sit back and enjoy this episode because it's going to unveil some interesting, fun truths, and hopefully it'll invite you to get curious within your own traditions and within your own gatherings and how you celebrate and all those things. Before we get into it, welcome to The Higher Paradigm. I'm your host, Laura. If you're watching this podcast on YouTube, please subscribe to this channel, like, share. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please follow this podcast if it feels in alignment with diving deep into topics and discussions that question the status quo. Feel free to share this episode, this podcast, with anyone you believe would resonate with it, and support the higher paradigm in growing and connecting in that like-minded community. So I want to first start off by sharing in this episode that I began about 2 years ago getting really interested and curious, and my intuition, it felt like it was pinging me to recognize that there was something more to this season than the traditional ways that we as a family had celebrated it historically and throughout my entire life. I no longer resonated with certain ways that we were celebrating this season, but I also didn't yet know a more sacred and deeper way of celebrating this season until a couple of years ago when I started to learn about the Wheel of the Year and how the winter solstice is a remarkable time on our planet where we are feeling the call to go inward, where magic is so potent, like that magical energy is just so potent in the world, in our fields. Our intuition comes more online, and we are being called to connect more with the rhythms of nature. And I really appreciated that so much through the Wheel of the Year, not just for the winter solstice, but also through every Sabbat that is on the Wheel of the Year. There's a specific energy, a specific frequency, a specific theme to each of the 8 Sabbats on this Wheel of the Year. And they represent each of the turning points, like turning of the seasons. So we have the fall equinox, the winter solstice, the spring equinox, and the summer solstice. But there's also the cross-quarter points or the mid-season points that are celebrated as well at the 6-week mark of each of the seasons. And I absolutely love connecting with the earth, connecting with the rhythms of the earth in this way. And I do feel like it brings me closer to divinity and recognizing the energy and really tuning in and paying attention to what's going on in the world and how that reflects what's going on internally and what we might be going through in our internal world or within our own environment. So I started to learn about all this and I found it vastly interesting. And then over the course of the last 2 years, especially when we came back to the winter solstice, I really started to get curious and feel this ping inside of me again, intuitive guidance telling me that there's something more here. And then I don't know, I just started to really get interested in I want to know more. I want to know the origins of Christmas. I want to know what happened before Jesus was born. I do deeply appreciate and feel the holiness of Jesus's birth, but I don't know, something just didn't feel like this is all that it is to me. So I started to dive in. I started first with learning about Yule, and that is also in pagan tradition connected with the wheel of the year and the sabbats. However, I don't celebrate them equally as much. Yule is the pagan tradition. The wheel of the year and the sabbats are more or less a celebration of the earth and the celebration of nature. For me, anyway. I mean, somebody could totally disagree with me, and that's fine. That's your opinion. There are definitely certain things within the Yule traditions that I started implementing last year because they felt true and as though I was deeply honoring my ancestors. And it felt like a soul resonance to do some of the rituals and implement some of the practices with my family that I did. I started with this book. The book is called Yule. Llewellyn's Sabbat Essentials is a series of books written about each of the Sabbats on the wheel of the year. So you can get books about each of the Sabbats and learn about the ancient pagan traditions of those Sabbats. And within this book, it teaches the rituals, recipes, and lore for the winter solstice. So I started to learn about Saturnalia and how Europe celebrated this time of year. And as I started to go deeper into this, I started to get more and more curious. Okay, well, how does this reflect our traditions? Like, how did this come to be within our culture? And how did it turn into a Christian, more or less, celebration slash holiday? And just like divine intervention or divine magic, when you ask questions like these out into the universe, God listens and sends you the information you are asking for. So I discovered a beautiful podcast episode on a podcast called The Way Forward. And there was a woman called Laura J. Day that shared about the history of Christmas. And she referenced a book in this episode called The Battle for Christmas. And it's by Stefan Niesenbaum. And I gotta tell you, holy cannoli, this is such an interesting read to learn about how Christmas in this country came to be the way that it is, but also how it reflects the ancient pagan traditions. So I'm very much looking forward to sharing what I know about all of this. Again, I do plan on continuing my research and diving more deeply into these topics because they are so vast and there's so much information. There's so many directions you could go. There's so many questions that as I continue to dive in and get more information, I'm asking more and more questions about certain things. So I will do my darndest to share what I know in a concise way and also offer you like just extremely interesting information. What I hope the most, honestly, is that this sparks something inside of you. Something turns on, activates, but also it gives you a permission to let go of what no longer feels in alignment with your values and how you actually want to celebrate this season. This is not just about Christmas. This is about the earth. This is about this time on this planet every single year when we are called to go into the dark and connect more deeply with our intuition and connect with God or source or our creator, connect with spirit to deepen in our own gifts. This is what this time of year is all about. It's magic, yes, and it has nearly zero to do with Santa Claus. I guess that is a matter of opinion. From what I've learned, it has zero to do with Santa Claus. That's not to say that if you celebrate with Santa Claus because your children believe in Santa, this is an invitation to really figure out what feels right for you and your family and how you want to celebrate with your children. And for me, I have a little one still who believes in Santa, and it's conflicting, honestly. Part of me feels like I am going to destroy her because when we find out that Santa isn't real, it kind of feels like a betrayal by our parents, right? But then it also snowballs into, well, then there is no magic in the world. And then I can't trust what I believe to be true. I mean, it is traumatizing in a sense, and in that it really wounds you. It really scars you as a child to discover that Santa Claus is not real and all of this was fake and magic is not real, but that's not actually true. So the nuance here for me and my husband and how we are approaching this with our kids or how we have with our older daughter, once she discovered that Santa was not real, we were honest with her, but I also reminded her of her own power and the magic that lives within her, and that Santa's merely a symbol of magic, a symbol of what we have living inside of us. He doesn't hold it all. It is us that has the ability to hone our own magic and to believe in ourselves. And the beautiful thing about where we are going as a family is that I am moving towards teaching my children about this season and how to utilize their own unique gifts so that it can benefit them and build their confidence in their own special ability to co-create the reality with God. But anyway, let's get into it. So let's start off by talking about where our actual Christmas culture comes from. And I'm going to go all the way back to the colonial days where there was Saturnalian practices adopted by the Western world. Now, Saturnalian practices come from ancient Rome, and they are ancient pagan practices, but also they were celebrations, rituals that were implemented by the Romans and in all of the classes. So I'm going to explain a little bit what that looked like. So we had the upper class, the middle class, the lower class. The upper class had slaves. Children at this time in history, were treated like lower class citizens. There was a lack of respect for children. So during Saturnalia, which was a time of overindulgence because it was slaughter season, so there was fresh meat available. And back in those days, when fresh meat was available to eat, it was a celebration because it was just a short window where meat was fresh and optimal, I guess is the best word that I can use. They were not eating meat in abundance as much as we do today, along with freshly fermented ale, which obviously is alcohol. So this time of year was more geared towards an agricultural culture and celebrating reaping the harvest in a sense. There was a lot of gluttony. It was like a free for all. And there were role reversals going on. The upper class owned slaves, and every class back in this time in ancient Rome, where they were celebrating the Saturnalia, every class and every body was involved. It was a community celebration of this specific season. And when I talk about role reversals, what I'm referring to is the slaves became the owners and the owners became the slaves. The children became the parents and the parents became the children. For 2 weeks or so in this season, there was this role reversal going on. And what I gathered from the book is that essentially it was fun, but it was also an attempt to appease or please the slaves so that they would serve their owners well throughout the rest of the year. And the same goes for the children. If they had these 2 weeks to be the parents and to discipline their parents as though they were the parents and they were making the rules and they were doing all these things, then for the rest of the year, hopefully they would behave themselves and they would stay in line. So that was a big part of it. There was cross-dressing, there was gambling. It was like an utter free-for-all. So this tradition of Saturnalia was brought over into the Western world. So that's how you can kind of envision this. So when it came into Western culture, at some point, probably because of Puritan influence, the upper classes were starting to decide they no longer wanted to participate in any of the Saturnalia practices and traditions. But the middle and lower classes were not having this, and they were very upset, and they wanted to continue the Saturnalia traditions. So therefore, they kept drinking and getting drunk and getting wild, and they would break into the upper classes' homes and force the owners of the homes or the people living there to watch their satires, watch them perform their plays, listen to their crude and rude songs that they would sing, and they would expect a gift of money or food or drink in return. And if those upper class people did not comply, then those that broke into their homes would threaten violence or vandalization. So this is what Saturnalia became because of these traditions being so out of control. And now the upper classes were starting to bow out and not want anything to do with it. This was increasing tension between the Puritans and those that were practicing these traditions. The Puritans then decided to attempt to outlaw Christmas, which did end up happening. Christmas became illegal for about 20 years back in the 1600s. But the majority of society back then did not appreciate this, and they did want to continue celebrating the season. Therefore, a group of small aristocrats got together and rebranded Christmas. So, this is when the traditions that we know today became a reality. A lot of what we know comes from a think tank, so to speak. How to create a holiday season that is more wholesome, that tames the masses, that brings order to society, and that obviously can help business owners to profit in some way, shape, or form. So they dreamt up Santa Claus, a man who appealed to the middle class, a working man, the carpenter. It was relatable to have this man who built with his hands and a man of husky stature. He looked like a man of that time. They actually drew out a few different pictures of what this Santa Claus would look like, and they adjusted his pipe size according to what made sense for the middle class, not the upper class, because the upper class used smoking pipes that were a different size than the middle or the lower class did. So they made sure that that made sense. And yeah, overall, they adjusted Santa Claus and the purpose of Santa Claus to accommodate the time. So, as I was saying, the lower class were being very boisterous and loud and rude and violent and all those things. They were breaking into these upper class homes. So, therefore, these aristocrats came up with the idea that Santa Claus also breaks and enters, but he does so quietly. And he doesn't take things from the home, he actually gives toys to the children. A lot of the other traditions that we have with the mistletoe and candles and everything else is basically just a regurgitation of pagan tradition from the old world. And things were deliberately cherry picked by the aristocrats to dream up a new tradition, one that would satisfy the masses yet tame it down. They dreamt up a romanticized image of Santa that was also relatable, and they found a picture of a woman by a Christmas tree with candles and the feast. In pagan tradition, the Christmas tree would be placed upon the table alongside the feast. And they rewrote the newsletter sent to the masses with this picture that the celebration of Christmas is meant to be within the walls of your own home. So, in order to control the masses and prevent this free for all, this open door to the community, and this crazy, wild tradition of Christmas or Saturnalia, they used this photo of this woman by this Christmas tree with children in front of her as the image that depicts what Christmas should look like and what these aristocrats were creating this new quote unquote Christmas to be. In essence, it was like a mashing up of things. Then I started to look into, well, where did St. Nick come from? So the real St. Nicholas was a 4th century Greek bishop from Myra, modern day Turkey, known for his secret generous gift giving and defense of the poor, famously providing dowries for 3 poor sisters to save them from slavery, which inspired the Santa Claus legend. The modern American figure of Santa Claus was a deliberate invention by a group of New York aristocrats and writers in the early 19th century who sought to reshape the Christmas holiday from a time of rowdy, alcohol-fueled public revelry into a gentler, family-focused occasion. They connected their new Christmas figure to the historical St. Nicholas via the existing Dutch-American Sinterklaas traditions. Washington Irving's influence in his book, A History of New York, popularized the Sinterklaas character, portraying him as a jolly, pipe-smoking Dutch burgher who flew in a wagon over the rooftops to deliver gifts. This work was widely read and helped cement the idea of a gift giver in American popular culture, though the image was more elfin than the modern depiction. And then come to find out also that The Night Before Christmas, the poem, was written to also contribute to this propaganda of Santa Claus and creating this new narrative in an attempt to control the masses and create a new holiday season. So that was written by somebody named Clement Clark Moore. It was called A Visit from St. Nicholas, better known as The Night Before Christmas. So that was really interesting to discover that actually came from the Dutch heritage and was reintroduced after the American Revolution by the same aristocrats that created Santa Claus. Through these literary and social efforts, these influential New Yorkers successfully co-opted the venerated historical figure of St. Nicholas, stripped him of his religious vestments, and transformed him into a secular magical character who could serve as non-denominational symbol for peaceful domestic Christmas holiday. Other figures that inspired Santa Claus were Father Christmas and the Norse god Odin. Father Christmas is a much older English figure personifying the spirit of Christmas cheer. Origins and role dating back to at least the 15th century. He was initially associated with adult feasting, revelry, and general goodwill. Unlike St. Nicholas, he was not originally a gift giver to children. He was often depicted as a tall, bearded man in a long green hooded cloak decorated with holiday and ivy. During the Victorian era, as Christmas shifted towards a family-centric holiday, the British Father Christmas began adopting the gift-giving aspects of the American Santa Claus, eventually merging into the familiar figure known today in the UK. Then I read about Odin, Norse god. Elements from the Norse god Odin, particularly associated with the midwinter festival of Yule, which again goes back to pagan tradition, also influenced Santa Claus's legend. During the Yuletide period, Odin was believed to lead a spectral procession, the wild hunt across the night sky. He rode an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir, which could travel great distances in the sky. A potential tradition involved children leaving food for Sleipnir in their boots or stockings by the hearth, hoping Odin would leave gifts in return. A direct parallel to the modern milk and cookies and stocking traditions. So then I'm reading all of this and I'm like, well, then these aristocrats didn't just dream up this idea of Santa Claus. They stole them from other cultures and just, again, cherry picked what they wanted and left behind the rest. Also tweaked certain aspects of the Father Christmas and certain aspects of Odin and applied them to the Santa Claus that they invented at that time. The traditions of the gift giving and the 8-legged horse and flying in the night sky, all of these, they regenerated for the purpose of creating a Christmas that appealed to our culture, to Western civilization. So I just thought that that was crazy. It's really not original. It's sort of a regurgitation of something else. It's just, it was chewed up and spit out and to look a little bit different. So I found that to be really interesting. Going back to how this came into Western civilization and our modern day Christmas, they focused on gift giving to children because at that time, children were seen as lower class citizens and they were not respected. So these aristocrats wanted to create a way for families to be together and to appreciate one another, not just the adults doing their adult things and discarding the children. But while that's beautiful, it was also where consumerism began because they recognized that by focusing on gift giving to children, that it can make a direct impact on local businesses. They pitched all of this to businesses within the community, and they pitched it in a way that if you, as a business owner, appeal to the children, you'll be able to make more money. So that is how consumerism honestly began. And this was also appealing to that tradition within Saturnalia of the role reversal, you know, bringing families together and having a more loving dynamic, but also honoring this Saturnalia tradition of role reversal where, you know, the children are gifted. The consumerism and the creation of our modern day Christmas has snowballed so out of control today. Then I started to learn about December 25th, and I actually have wondered about this. Why is Christmas on December 25th when the solstice is on the 21st? And something that I discovered is that the solstice actually used to be on the 25th, first of all. It has adjusted itself to be the longest day on the 21st versus the 25th. But the other thing is that Christ's birth, along with Mithras, which is another being who is quote unquote the Son of God, was a chosen day of birth by Constantine. So who is Constantine? Constantine was the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity. He played a pivotal role for elevating the status of Christianity in Rome. So what does Constantine have to do with Mithras, and who is Mithras? Emperor Constantine and Mithras are linked because Mithraism, a popular mystery cult in the Roman Empire, significantly overlapped with early Christianity and symbols, rituals like initiation and a savior figure, and even physical locations. Constantine eventually championed Christianity after his 312 AD conversion. His background included devotion to Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, and Mithras, leading many scholars to suggest he adopted and adapted Mithraic traditions like the Sunday holiday and December 25th, which was Mithras's birthday, into the new state religion to unify the diverse empire. Shared symbols and concepts, both traditions featured a savior god, initiation rituals, concepts of good versus evil, and salvation. Constantine, who worshipped the unconquered sun, and Mithras integrated pagan practices into Christianity. Many early Christian churches were built directly over ancient Mithraic temples, showing a physical transition. The Christian celebration of Sunday, the Sun's Day, and December 25th, Christmas, Sol Invictus birth, were adopted from sun-worshipping cults, including Mithraism, to appeal to the Roman populace. Constantine's role used Christianity to unify the Roman Empire, potentially incorporating familiar elements from powerful cults like Mithraism to ease the transition. His conversion in 312 AD marked the decline of Mithraism as it became the favored state religion, but many of its practices subtly influenced Christian doctrine and tradition. The debate is that some scholars argue that similarities stem from shared Hellenistic roots in Asia Minor, while others contend that Constantine intentionally transferred Mithraic doctrines into the church. So it's really interesting that Jesus's birth date is in alignment with these traditions and the Mithraic tradition. But then I wanted to go even deeper. Something just said to me, were there other sons of God, quote unquote, that were born on December 25th? Were there other sons of God before Jesus? I'm going to just say this. I do feel like Jesus is with me on this. It's not to discount or discredit Jesus, but it is just to recognize that bigger, broader truth exists. The truth of Jesus is merely a fractal within the spiral of truths that exist, and we couldn't possibly know. And so therefore, what God is guiding me to recognize and interpret is that we only know a piece of the story. The Bible is only a fraction, and the truth of Jesus is true, but that doesn't mean that that's all that there is. So be open and willing to look outside the box. Oh, and I also then looked into, were there others who were a son of God that was born on December 25th of a virgin. And the response I got was, while claims exist, many virgin-born savior figures in ancient myths like Horus, Dionysus, Krishna, Attis, and Perseus often involve divine conception, miraculous births, or divine parentage, rather than strict virginity in the later Christian sense, with figures like Buddha and Hercules also appearing in comparative lists, though their birth narratives vary, making Jesus one of many figures with miraculous birth stories, though the concept of perpetual virginity for the mother is distinct. And then I get into virgin versus divine conception. Many ancient stories involve divine fathering, gods impregnating mortals, which differs from the Christian concept of the Holy Spirit impregnating Mary, who remained a virgin. Myth versus history. These figures are often mythical or legendary, and comparisons often highlight shared narrative tropes rather than historical facts. Historians debate the extent of borrowing between these traditions, but acknowledge that virgin birth narratives were powerful and present in many cultures before Jesus. Several saviors or deities in ancient stories have purported birth dates on or around December 25th, which often align with the winter solstice in ancient calendars. The selection of this date for Jesus' birth was a strategic decision by early Christian leaders to compete with existing pagan festivals and ease the conversion of people into Christianity. Wow. The Roman cult of Mithras celebrated his birthday on December 25th as the Natalius Solis Invicti, birthday of the unconquered sun. He was a god of light and truth, often depicted as being born from a rock. Attis, the birth of this vegetation god born to the Virgin Nana, was also celebrated on December 25th in some traditions. His festivals involved themes of death, crucifixion on a tree, and resurrection around the spring equinox. What? Just crazy. Just crazy. Nothing is what it seems. I mean, that story was before Jesus was born and before he experienced what he experienced. I'm not discrediting his experience and the story of Jesus. What I'm saying is things are cyclical. There's fractals of truth. There's something deeper here. I feel like there's something more. And what the actual heck? Some sources claim the ancient Egyptians celebrated the birth of Horus, the solar child, on December 25th or around the winter solstice, aligning his emergence with the return of the sun and longer days. Dionysus is Greek. Some local cults of the Greek god of wine and ecstasy celebrated his birth around the winter solstice, as noted by the 4th century writer Macrobius. Other figures like the Roman god Saturn, the Greek god Apollo, and the Syrian god Adonis, also had festivals or associations with the December 25th period or the wider midwinter Saturnalia festival. It is important to note that many of these specific December 25th dates are derived from later Roman era sources or interpretations as Christianity grew. The key element across these diverse traditions is the celebration of the winter solstice, the return of the sun and the light. And then I'm thinking about this, and I might have heard this before, is the return of the sun, S-U-N, the return of the sun, S-O-N. To me, that's like, whoa, mind-blowing. Like, of course, this is when a holy birth occurs. Of course this is. It represents that light will return. It represents that the good will prevail, right? That's how I interpret it. that no matter what tradition you believe in, no matter what you value, whether it be the Egyptian or the Peruvian or the Roman or the Catholic or the Christian or whatever it is, the point is that good will prevail. The light will return. The sun will come again. And the spirit of sun, the Holy Spirit, will reign upon us again and again and again. Every winter, we have this opportunity to reconnect with the Holy Spirit and recognize the light within each of us and that we are the sun. The sun lives within us. That's how I interpret all of this. And that's why I think it's so beautiful, because it's so much bigger and so much more abundant. And it all comes back to the solstice. It all comes back to honoring the season, and I just think that that's so lovely, and it's so in alignment with how we're intended to celebrate this time of year. The rebirth of the sun. S-U-N and S-O-N. The rebirth. The death and the rebirth. We get to be reborn every freaking solstice. Just freaking amazing. But then I did keep going a little bit deeper, and I'm going to share a little bit about this, but I'm not going to share too much because I feel like this could be a whole other episode of its own. This all led me because there was this distinction between the virgin birth versus the divine conception. So I don't know, I got a ping, and I have looked into this before, but it's been a while, so I wanted to look into it again. And virgin, okay, I know that there's a history behind this word, that it didn't always mean a pure woman who has not had sex. So I wanted to dig deeper, because even back in the Virgin Mary's time, this was pre-Christianity. So what did it mean actually back then? So I learned that the word virgin originates from the Latin word virgo, meaning maiden or unwedded. And I'm like, no, there's more. There's more. So I kept looking in, and the word virgin meaning strength, many scholars trace Virgo and the word virility to a common Indo-European root, meaning strength, force, vigor, or power. In this interpretation, a virgin was a woman who was one in herself, or not beholden to any man, not married and under a husband's authority. In ancient Greek and Roman societies, terms like Virgo primarily referred to a woman's social status as unmarried or a maiden, for whom sexual inexperience was a cultural assumption, but not the explicit definition. The concept of sovereign woman is supported by the application of the term to powerful goddesses who were not subject to male control or the temptations of male goddesses. The goddess of the hunt, wilderness, and the moon was a Parthenos, or virgin, not because she was inherently chaste in the modern sense, but because she was wild, independent, and powerful, choosing her own path outside the bounds of marriage. The shift in meaning, the shift towards the modern physical definition of a person, specifically a woman, who has not had penetrative sex, was largely influenced by the medieval Christian church. So medieval times is much later than the times that the Virgin Mary conceived Jesus. Like, how crazy is that? We all have been conditioned to believe that virgin equals no sex, but actually it has way deeper meaning than that. And obviously, Mother Mary was a sovereign woman. She was wild, independent, and powerful. And she did choose her own path. And she was gifted with Jesus in her womb because of her relationship with God. Yeah, I mean, there's just so much more to it than what we know. And that's where I'll leave it because there obviously is just so much more information I could gather and I could go off. I definitely want to create an episode where we talk more about the sovereign woman, sovereign women and the feminine, how women operated and were treated and were looked upon back in ancient times before the rise of the Christian indoctrination and being squelched by pagan traditions and witch hunts and all these things. It's like really interesting. And yeah. So I hope that you found this episode fun and interesting and insightful, and it just supports your interest and your desire to create a holiday season that feels true and authentic to you, but also reintroduces new yet old traditions into your life, but your family too, so that it is sacred and holy and nourishing and family oriented, surrounded by love and the abundance that lives within each of us and within the walls of your home, and not consumerism and not, focusing so much on the magic of a being that was created over and over and over again, like Santa Claus. Instead, instilling the truth of magic and the magic that we hold within each of us into our children and creating new traditions. I hope that that's something that you feel called to do and investigate within yourself and maybe even dive into some of this for yourself. So, yeah, that's all I'll say about all of that for today. And I very much look forward to the last episode we will be sharing this year of the higher paradigm next week, where I will talk about how I celebrate the winter solstice, what ritual practice I have implemented that is so fun, sacred, beautiful, magical, and it supports you in the whole coming year. So I very much look forward to sharing all of that with you and being a guide for how we can just create a more sacred and holy experience for this beautiful time of year. So thank you so much for being here. Again, as always, like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow the Higher Paradigm on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and share this episode and this podcast with anyone that you believe would resonate with it and is looking to grow in like-minded community. And of course, as always, too, if you feel called to share in the comments how you feel about this episode, what you're thinking, any questions, if you want to start a conversation, I am so here for it and would love to hear from you. So until next time, much love and many blessings to you.